Hi, I'm Raven and I'm here at the VWA workshop today to tell you about the Sawstop. The table saw has been a mainstay of woodworking for over 100 years, and this particular model, the Sawstop, features a safety mechanism that will prevent the blade from continuing motion if it detects any sort of skin. It can be used in a multitude of ways. It's extremely versatile, but for today's purposes, we'll just touch on the absolute basics. At its most fundamental, it is a circular blade attached to a motor which spins to slice the timber. The blade can be raised and lowered and tilted to create angled cuts. Keep in mind that when the machine is operational, the green light is on, it can be very easy to turn on the blade. So if you're going to be operating close to the blade, making adjustments of height or tilt, turn it off first, make those adjustments, and then turn it back on. The configuration of the blade and the power of the motor require the use of a fence because it's much more powerful than, say, the bandsaw. Similar to the panel saw, the Sawstop can be used for rip cuts and cross cuts. Rip cuts happen along the grain. Cross cuts, as you would imagine, happen across the grain. So before we turn the machine on, let's go through some of the safety features of the Sawstop. I want to make sure I have all my PPE with me. My eye protection, dust mask, my ear protection, and I don't have any loose clothing that could get caught in the blade, and my hair is tied back. Here you'll see the extraction arm, which pulls the dust off of the blade as you're pushing a piece of timber through. That's connected to a plastic guard, which also protects you from the blade. There's also an under-table extraction, which pulls the dust out. You'll see behind the blade a riving knife. It prevents the piece of timber from twisting as you're pushing it through. So you always use the Sawstop with a fence. It can be slid sideways, and you'll notice a gauge here will tell you how wide that space is between the blade and the fence. Make sure it's locked into place before you run your piece through. The fence can be moved to the other side of the blade if you need to cut on that side, but remember to consult your tutor first. As I mentioned, you can raise and lower the blade and tilt it to get your desired cut. To raise and lower it, you rotate the wheel on your right. To tilt it, you rotate the wheel on your left. Both of these feature locks, so make sure that they are unlocked before you try to move them. The machine is operational when you see a solid green light. If you see any other lights, like a blinking red light, you know it's not ready to use. So, when you see the solid green light, you can turn it on. You do that by pulling the big red button out towards you. You can turn it off by pushing it back in, either with your hand or, if you need to, with your knee. So a couple things to keep in mind when you're using the Sawstop. There is the possibility of what we would call kickback, with a piece of timber being pushed through the table saw. The riving knife largely prevents this, but in the case that it does happen, it would fly directly backwards. So it's always a good idea to stand just to the side so that you're not in the line of fire. In addition, you never want your hand directly behind the blade. You want to make sure that if you were to slip or the piece would slip forward, your hand's not going to sail into those teeth. So as I mentioned before, the Sawstop can be used for ripping and cross-cutting. When ripping, you want to make sure that your piece is fully dressed. That means that the side running against the fence and along the bed are both flat. As a general rule, we want to keep our hands at least 150 mil away from the blade. So if you're cutting a piece that is narrower than 150 mil, you'll need a push stick to run your piece through. Now, if you've got a piece that's 300 mil or shorter, or 1.5 meters or longer, ask your tutor to help you with additional safety steps. Now we're going to cover some of the steps you'll need to go through before your rip cut. So when you're adjusting the blade for height, what you'll want to do is put the piece of timber up next to the blade. You don't want any more of the blade exposed than is necessary. So you will drop the height of the blade down using the lever on the right and line up the gullet of the blade with the top of the timber. Ideally, the gullet will be just a little bit higher than the height of the timber. So you can also adjust the fence. Use this guide to set an approximate width. You'd want to overestimate just a little bit and then double check with your own measuring device to make sure that it's accurate, and then set it in place. One thing to consider when cutting your piece is the thickness of your piece. Keep in mind that while you can make a deep cut on the Sawstop, the more material you're removing, the more blade is exposed, the more dangerous the cut is. So you'll want to consult your tutor if you're going to make a deep cut. Now that we've covered the setup for making your rip cut, I'll walk you through the motions of making the cut itself. So as I mentioned before, you'll want the face of the board sitting flat against the fence and flat against the table. Remember to stand to the side so that you're not in the line of fire in case of kickback. So before you run your piece through, you want to make sure it's just sitting behind the blade, not touching the blade when you turn the machine on. Assuming that the main power is off, at this point you'll turn it back on, wait for the solid green light, then pull out the red lever to engage the blade. So at this point you're ready to run your piece through. Remember to maintain pressure downward and against the fence to keep the piece secure as you're making your rip cut. Now, because the fence is set up closer than 150 mil to the blade, we'll want to use a push stick to run the piece through and avoid getting our fingers close to the spinning blade. Although you want to be exerting downward pressure and sideways pressure on your piece, keep in mind that you want to at all times be avoiding leaning into the blade. You wouldn't want, for example, should the piece disappear, your hand to fall into that spinning blade. One way of doing that is making sure that your center of gravity is stable, that you're able to move your arms and hands in whatever way you need to send the piece through while maintaining a confident stance. As you're running the piece through, make sure your hand is never at any point over the blade itself. Even if you're doing a trench cut, in which case the blade isn't cutting through the top of the board, you still don't want your hands anywhere close to where the blade is actually running. Regarding the speed at which you cut, make sure you're slow and steady so that you're not forcing the piece on the blade, and you're also allowing the chips to clear between the teeth as you go. As you're finishing your cut, make sure that your hand does not pass over the blade. Don't reach for the piece that you've just cut or your off-cut. Use the push stick to clear it from the path of the blade. You can turn the machine off at that point, but keep in mind the Sawstop can still be activated while the blade is spinning. Wait for the blade to stop spinning before you get your piece. When you finish your cut, make sure the blade is reset to 0 degrees and the height of the blade is reset to a neutral height. Make sure that you clean up after yourself and the space is ready for the next user. Additional tools we can use to help with our rip cuts are push sticks, like we mentioned earlier, rollers, which help run long pieces through, and feather boards, which will help keep the piece pressed against the fence, which helps keep your fingers away from the blade. If you think you need to use any of these tools, ask your tutor and they'll help you set them up. So even though the Sawstop features technology which makes it an incredibly safe machine to use, it's also very expensive to run through the process of repairing it once that's been triggered. It can damage the blade, it can wear on the motor, and the cartridge needs to be replaced. The safety mechanism on the Sawstop is triggered by any change in electrical current, which means you can't run through any material that conducts electricity. So make sure you don't run through any material that might have nails or any other metal. Make sure that it's not green or wet timber, because this can trigger the mechanism. So now we've covered when to use the Sawstop, how to use it safely. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the VWA.